Imagine this. You're a parent, standing in line for hours outside a shattered building, your child clinging to your hand, weak, hungry, frightened. Not for toys or treats, not even for a regular meal, but for a spoonful of rice or a sip of drinkable water. Around you, hundreds of others press forward, desperate for the trucks carrying life-saving aid, hoping this time there's something left for them. Now imagine the entire population around you, more than 2 million people, living this moment every single day. Gaza is not just facing a humanitarian crisis. Experts say it is on the very brink of famine. But despite mounting international outrage, the aid coming in is, in the words of the United Nations Secretary General, a teaspoon when a flood is needed. Why, in a world where logistics companies deliver millions of packages daily, where food surpluses exist in plenty, are children still dying from starvation in Gaza? What's really stopping the flood of aid, and what happens if nothing changes? Today we're going to uncover the real reasons behind Gaza's aid crisis, and what it means for the future of the region, and perhaps the world itself. To understand how we got here, we need to rewind. The Gaza Strip, a sliver of land just 41 kilometers long, has been a global flashpoint for decades. Squeezed between Israel, Egypt, and the Mediterranean, it's home to more than 2 million people, most of whom are refugees or descendants of refugees from past conflicts. Since 2007, Gaza has been under a land, air, and sea blockade imposed primarily by Israel, with Egyptian cooperation. The stated aim was to contain the militant group Hamas, but the result has been catastrophic for ordinary people. Before the current war, Gaza's economy was in ruins. Unemployment hovered above 40%, with youth joblessness even higher. The blockade meant everything, from cement and textbooks to food and medicine, was tightly controlled. Imports were restricted, exports nearly impossible, and young Gazans grew up knowing only power cuts, shortages, and periodic devastation from war. Life was shaped by scarcity and uncertainty. Repeated military operations over the years, most recently the massive escalations since October 2023, have taken a staggering toll. According to the United Nations, at least 53,822 people have been killed since then, with more than 122,000 wounded, overwhelmingly women and children. Infrastructure is devastated. Hospitals are barely functioning, water and sewage systems are shattered, and nearly every family has been displaced, often multiple times. And yet, as broken as Gaza's economy became, the people survived, mainly thanks to humanitarian aid. Before October 2023, about 500 trucks of food, medicine, and essential supplies entered Gaza every single day. These lifelines were coordinated by the UN and a complex network of aid agencies working against the odds. But war changed everything. When hostilities erupted again, Israel closed nearly all crossings, launching a total siege. For nearly 80 days, almost no aid entered Gaza. Even now, with minor easing at certain crossings, only a few hundred trucks make it through each week. Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, made this chilling statement. All the aid authorized until now amounts to a teaspoon of aid when a flood of assistance is required. Here's what that looks like on the ground. The amount of food or the aid that has been allowed for the past 2 days is not enough or sufficient, and does not address the deepening humanitarian crisis caused by months of Israeli devastation and bombardment across the Strip, reported Al Jazeera's Hani Mahmoud from Gaza City. Palestinians are struggling on a daily basis to find food and drinking water, and still queuing for hours in front of whatever is left of the operational local community kitchens that are providing only a tiny amount of food for a hungry population. It's not just journalists saying this. Listen to Dr. Ahmed Al-Farah from Nasser Hospital. Most Gazans are living off food scraps, and I am predicting a rise in deaths from food insecurity if nothing changes. Let's look at the numbers. As of May 2025, at least 29 Gazans, mostly children and the elderly, have already died from starvation-related causes. The UN estimates that 14,000 infants are at immediate risk due to malnutrition. Think about that for a moment. More than twice the population of your average town, made up entirely of babies, on the brink of dying from hunger in an era of global food plenty. Louise Wateridge, spokesperson for the UN Relief and Works Agency, put it in stark terms. 5 trucks of aid are nowhere near enough. And that's on good days. The UN says only a third of recent deliveries even reach Gaza's warehouses. Most are blocked, looted, or caught in the chaos. But why is aid not getting in? Isn't it just a matter of sending more trucks? To answer that, we have to zoom out and see how deeply politics, logistics, and security are entangled at every stage of this crisis. The blockade isn't just a line on the map, it's a web of checkpoints, permits, and restrictions that make it nearly impossible to move goods freely. Every barrel of flour, every box of medicine has to be approved, inspected, and often waits for days or weeks at the border. The recent conflict made this exponentially worse. Israel, citing security concerns, closed the main crossings for weeks. Even since the partial reopening of the Kerem Shalom crossing, chaos reigns. Trucks are unloaded in no man's land, then stuck for hours or robbed before reaching civilian distribution centers. According to the UN, 80% of Gaza has been either declared an Israeli militarized zone or is under evacuation orders. Imagine trying to deliver food in a war zone with constantly shifting front lines. Tom Fletcher, the UN's humanitarian chief, delivered a stark warning: thousands of babies could die if aid doesn't reach them immediately. So, international actors have looked for alternatives. In the last month, a new US-backed delivery mechanism was announced. Under this plan, private contractors would escort aid convoys to so-called secure hubs, where civilian teams would distribute the food and supplies. This was meant to bypass some of the delays and obstructions. But there's a catch. The United Nations, arguably the world's most experienced humanitarian body, refused to participate in this scheme. Why? According to Secretary General Guterres, it doesn't meet basic humanitarian standards. The scheme fails to respect the principles of humanity, impartiality, independence, and neutrality. The UN insists its own system, which could move 9,000 trucks worth of supplies already waiting just outside Gaza, is ready to go, if only access is granted. Even when aid gets in, danger stalks every truck. Recent reports say Israeli airstrikes have targeted Palestinian security officers assigned to guard relief deliveries. Insufficient supplies are at greater risk of looting, notes Jens Laerke, UN spokesman for humanitarian affairs. With every organization forced to operate at the edge of collapse, even the basics, like making sure food isn't stolen before it reaches children, can't be guaranteed. This isn't a crisis driven by a lack of supplies. It's a crisis of access, of politics, and of deliberate obstruction. Meanwhile, international pressure on Israel is growing more intense. The UK, France, and Canada have issued stern warnings, threatening sanctions over the continued obstruction of humanitarian aid. But Israel insists that its security needs are paramount. Officials claim Hamas has exploited aid deliveries in the past for military purposes, and that increased monitoring is needed. But on the ground, it's clear. Most Gazans are simply trying to survive. The numbers are getting worse, not better. Majed Abu Ramadan, health minister for the Palestinian Authority, told reporters, "The UN's estimate of 14,000 babies at risk is realistic, possibly an underestimate. And what of the future? If the current trends hold, a UN-backed report estimates that 500,000 people in Gaza could face outright starvation in the coming months. That's not a miscalculation. That is the literal risk." The World Food Program and other major agencies have warned that Gaza is on track for a famine that could become the worst humanitarian disaster of the 21st century. The stakes are enormous. This isn't just an issue for Gaza or even the Middle East. If the international community fails to deliver aid where it is most needed, what does it mean for the global order? What happens to the principles of humanitarian neutrality and the promise of never again after the horrors of past famines? By the end of this month, a new delivery mechanism could be in place. But with the UN refusing to take part, questions remain. Will private contractors and ad hoc teams be able to handle the scale and complexity of Gaza's needs? Or will chaos and violence continue to block the aid that so many depend on for basic survival? Most urgently, will the world unlock the supplies waiting just across the border? Or will another generation of Gazan children pay the price? In the second half of this video, we'll dig into the forces battling over Gaza's lifelines, reveal the real interests at stake, and ask, what would it actually take to break the deadlock and save lives before it's too late? So, with aid deliveries at a trickle and Gaza's population on the edge, the fundamental question looms. What comes next? What real forces might finally break this lethal deadlock? And what are the consequences if they don't? Let's start by looking at the possible futures. The most immediate and dire scenario is, simply, collapse. UN agencies warn that with at least 14,000 infants now at risk from malnutrition, we could see, in the words of Health Minister Majed Abu Ramadan, not just dozens but thousands of preventable child deaths within weeks. On the ground, parents are already forced to make impossible choices. Do they stay in line for hours at a food distribution point, or search for clean water somewhere else, risking missing the only meal their family might get that day. Dr. Ahmed Al-Farah at Nasser Hospital describes the situation bluntly. Most Gazans are now living off food scraps and foraging. Famine is not coming, it is here. If aid remains blocked or only trickles in under current restrictions, the breakdown could spread rapidly. Hunger leads to weakened immune systems and the spread of disease. Desperate populations might raid aid convoys or warehouses, as has already happened, sparking chaos and violence. The healthcare system, already shattered by months of bombing, will collapse under the strain, with no supplies or fuel for generators. The social fabric of Gaza, too, is under threat. When hunger becomes the norm, it breeds not only despair but division. Communities can turn against each other over access to aid. We've already seen aid trucks looted by desperate crowds, evidence that basic security is vanishing. These breakdowns aren't just humanitarian, they have generational consequences. Malnourished children face lifelong physical and cognitive damage, setting back Gaza's society for decades. But the crisis will not be contained within Gaza's borders. As starvation deaths mount, outrage is boiling over worldwide. Western allies like the UK, France, and Canada are now openly threatening sanctions against Israel over its blockade. Such moves would have been unthinkable even a year ago. Pressure is also mounting on the United States to leverage its influence over Israel's policies. Internationally, we could see a new phase of diplomatic confrontation, not just at the UN, but in bilateral relations and economic ties. Israel risks becoming more isolated, facing divestment campaigns and legal challenges under international law. If a major donor like the US or EU finally conditions its aid or arms sales on increased humanitarian access, the stalemate could break, at least partially. But this depends on a level of political will that so far has not materialized. Is it possible? There are a few glimmers of hope. A new US-backed delivery mechanism called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is being tested. The idea is for private contractors to bring supplies to secure hubs where civilian teams distribute them. This could, in theory, bypass some bottlenecks and avoid direct attacks on aid convoys. But the UN has refused to participate, citing a lack of basic humanitarian standards and guarantees for safety, independence, and neutrality. Without the backing and expertise of established agencies, this mechanism risks failure or, worse, the diversion of aid to black markets or militias. Experts warn that without a true ceasefire and the full reopening of crossings under international supervision, such schemes are stopgaps at best. The essential infrastructure, roads, warehouses, fuel, security, has been largely destroyed. And as Guterres put it, all the aid authorized so far is a teaspoon when a flood is needed. What then would a real solution look like? Even the best technology, the most creative delivery mechanisms, or the most well-meaning private groups will fail if the core political deadlock remains. The only force powerful enough to break through is political will, either from Israel itself under intense international pressure, or from the world's major powers acting in concert to enforce humanitarian access. Imagine for a moment a UN-mandated international aid corridor, protected by peacekeepers, or guaranteed by binding Security Council resolutions. Trucks rolling in, not under fire, but welcomed at crossing points. Food, water, and medicine distributed by vetted humanitarian professionals. No more desperate lines at bombed-out bakeries, just regular, reliable access to the basics of life. That vision isn't fantasy. It's the norm in most large humanitarian crises, when the international community decides enough is enough. In the absence of such a breakthrough, the alternative is grim. Gaza becomes a warning for the world, a place where, in the 21st century, infants die on live stream and aid convoys sit idling just out of reach while politicians argue. As Tom Fletcher, UN humanitarian chief, put it, "If we cannot get aid to Gaza, what message does that send to every besieged population on Earth? That human suffering is negotiable." So where does this leave us? What can the world learn? And what can ordinary viewers do? First, this crisis makes one thing crystal clear. Humanitarian action cannot be separated from politics. All the crowdfunding, all the charity appeals in the world amount to nothing if trucks can't cross borders. So when you hear calls to send more aid, remember, the real battle is for access, security, and political permission. Second, the Gaza famine exposes the limits of technological quick fixes. Drones, digital tracking, or clever new distribution models can help, but they cannot substitute for the hard work of diplomacy and accountability. The UN's refusal to join flawed aid schemes is not just bureaucracy. It's an insistence that aid delivery must meet basic principles: neutrality, impartiality, safety. When those are violated, aid can actually fuel conflict or become a tool of control. Third, and perhaps most profoundly, the situation in Gaza shows how international attention and outrage do make a difference. Each time a new death is reported, or a photo of a starving child circulates, pressure mounts on those in power. It is slow, it is agonizing, but it can shift the calculus. The threat of sanctions or the promise of recognition can push governments to act. So what can you, as a viewer, actually do? 1. Stay informed and skeptical. Share credible reports, not rumors. Amplify voices of credible humanitarian workers and affected civilians. Call out misinformation wherever it appears. 2. Support organizations that work on the ground with established track records. Even if they're currently blocked, their advocacy and documentation efforts are crucial. 3. If you live in a country with influence over Middle Eastern policy, like the US, UK, or EU states, make your voice heard. Contact your representatives. Demand an end to policies that enable blockades or obstruct aid. International politics only shifts when citizens push it too. And 4, recognize that Gaza's crisis is not an isolated tragedy. It is a signal of how humanitarian law and norms are eroding worldwide, from Myanmar's Rohingya to Sudan's war-affected regions. The lessons here, about access, accountability, and the limits of good intentions, will shape future crises too. So, returning to our central question, can any force, political, technological, or otherwise, break the deadlock and get life-saving aid into Gaza before a full-scale catastrophe? The honest answer is, it's possible, but only if the world's political will aligns to force it to happen. Technology and creativity can help, and humanitarian organizations stand ready. But without the permission of gatekeepers, be it states, armed groups, or international coalitions, those solutions remain parked at the border. We are left, then, with a stark but urgent truth. Gaza's fate in the coming weeks will be decided not by the number of aid trucks, but by the courage, or cowardice, of those in power. The supplies are ready. The need is overwhelming. Only the blockade stands in the way. Here's a secret fact that rarely makes headlines. Since the start of 2024, the UN estimates that enough aid was donated for Gaza to keep every resident fed and healthy for months. What's missing is not generosity, but access. Remember that, next time you see shocking images and wonder if the world is doing enough. The tragedy is not one of scarcity, it is one of blockage. And if you take away just one lesson, let it be this: humanitarian disasters are never just about logistics. They are about power, and that power can only be changed when enough people demand it. If you found this report valuable, share it. Subscribe for more deep dives into today's critical stories. Leave your thoughts or questions in the comments below. Do you think the international community should do more to break Gaza's blockade, or are there better paths forward? Your voice, your engagement,